Hey everyone, this is Sonal standing in for the Bloomberg chat. Before I get on to the conversation, I would like to extend my positivity, my prayers, and my best wishes to all the families who have been challenged by the second wave of pandemic. I honestly strongly believe that there is a lot of strength in mass prayers. So I would actually request all the audience, all the viewers who have joined in to actually extend their positivity to all the families who are actually struggling out there because we need to ride this wave together as a community and as a nation. And please stay home unless and until it's absolutely necessary. Stay safe and stay healthy. So coming to today's topic. Today, our topic of conversation is all about rural education. Earlier, actually, I thought I might be able to squeeze in both rural education and health, but then I thought that I won't be doing justice to either of those topics because they are standalone conversation topics on its own. So today our focus will be only rural education and we will talk about the health sector in the coming episodes. You will be surprised to know that today 87% of the schools in India are in the rural area. And government is actually rolling out schemes, a lot of schemes for the betterment of innovative education in the rural segment. But how do they get conceptualized? How do they get implemented? Do they actually translate into jobs? Do they actually translate into sustainable, innovative learning for them? How about technology? How about digitalization? Because we've all seen that during the pandemic, all the schools in the urban areas pushed themselves to ensure that all the students actually get learning. We came up with innovative ideas so that we can cater to all of these schools in the urban areas. But how about the rural section? How did they get affected by the pandemic? So many such issues and more, and we had just the right person to address all of these. Seema Bansal, who has been with BCG for 21 years, and she heads their social. Before I quote, she heads their social impact practice in India and Asia Pacific with us. So let me welcome Seema Bansal to the studio, and let's roll on with the conversation.
Hi, Sonal.
Hi, Seema. Welcome to the Bloomberg chat. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be speaking to you on this platform. We've known each other for 13 years, but good to talk to you like this.
Yes. Yeah. So me and Seema actually bike together. Well, actually saying biking together is exaggerating it because Seema is like I don't even know. So I'm just a novice and Seema is like a pro, Like she talks about headwind and tailwind and the speed, and I talk about what we anyway. Coming to today's conversation, let me quickly introduce Seema to all of you, and then we can go ahead with the conversation. Seema Bansal has been with BCG for 20 plus years now and leads the firm's social impact practice in India and Asia Pacific. Seema's work mainly involves working with and advising central and state government, foundations, development sector, organizations, and NGOs. She has worked extensively in education, schools, skilling, and universities, as well as in other topics of health, food distribution, agriculture, and employment. The work ranges from supporting policy thinking to actually making change happen on the ground. She is a TED and a Tedx speaker and a host as well. She received her BE from PEC Chandigarh and an MBA from IIM Calcutta. Welcome again to the Bloomberg Chat. So happy to have you actually.
Thanks, Sonal.
So starting with the basics, Seema, how does BCG get involved in the social sector with the government? What are they outsourcing to BCG?
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it outsourcing. I would call it partnerships, maybe. But there are two types of projects. I think the simpler one to understand are when we do sort of short assignments, 3 to 4 months long, where we create a thought piece for the government. So, last year, for example, we worked with government of Delhi, and we helped them reflect on the reforms that they had undertaken over the last 4 or 5 years. Very popular government of Delhi's education reforms. Everyone talks about them. So they asked us to look at those reforms, see what has actually worked, why it worked, what hasn't worked, why it didn't work, and what should they do going forward. So that's a short sort of 3-month effort. It gets done quickly. It's a thought piece that we share with the government or publicly on behalf of the government. Similarly, we're doing a body of work with a very large tech company right now on thinking through how technology can be leveraged to train teachers. Of course, all of it happened because of COVID. So historically, teacher training or any kind of training happens in the physical format. But this tech company tried to train about 60,000 teachers across UP, Maharashtra, and Delhi on technology platforms. And they wanted us to come in and look at how effective that was, what worked, what didn't work. Right. So that's sort of one set of projects that we do. But the bigger body of work and the body of work that I get really excited about is actually working with government school systems to help them really change or transform the way government schools are actually run, right? So government schools in India are largely controlled by the states. So while it's a concurrent topic, central government sets policy, but schools are run by state governments, right? So we would, for example, get in Gurgaon notifications from Haryana government about Haryana schools and schools in Haryana. So working with states and departments of education in states to help them think about how they can improve their school education systems, especially the government ones. India, as most people probably know, is one of the countries with the weakest public systems. You know, today in India, only about 50-55% of kids go to government schools. That is the lowest anywhere in the world. You know, typically in any country, normally 70-80-90% kids go to public schools, and only 10-20% kids go to private schools. So states come to BCG and other organizations like BCG to say, how do we actually improve our government schools such that we provide better education, better quality education, and more kids want to come to government schools, and we don't become irrelevant over time. So these are 2-year projects, 3-year projects, sometimes even 5-year projects where we partner with the government, not only to help them think through what should be done, but also help them implement it over that duration.
I was actually going to come to that. So it looks like you create like a framework and concept for them, and it must be different for every state because India is such a diverse country. You know, every state must have their own requirements. So how does the implementation take place on the ground root level?
Yeah. So I think firstly, just on the roadmap itself, or what needs to happen, I would say that in terms of big unlocks, right, big things which will change education in government schools, there are typically 8 or 10 things, right? And then what we do is, for example, it could be optimizing the school structure in terms of size, scale, number of teachers. It could be something around curricular reforms. It could be something around teacher training. It could be something around assessments, as an example. And typically what a state needs to be something out of these 4, 5, 10 things. What we do is firstly understand what is the starting point of the state, but then also what is the current motivation, political will, desire in the state in terms of what changes do they want to undertake, right? So for example, some of the changes related to staff are typically very difficult. If you want to change how staff is assessed or how they're promoted and make it more linked to accountability and outcomes, very few states will be willing to do that, right? But most states are very happy to take on curricular reforms and some of those things. So one of the first things that we do is actually really identify what is the need of the state, but also how much political will and administrative will there is for taking on those changes. And that is how we determine what needs to happen in that state. Then we get into implementation. And look, our job, we have very small teams. We have like teams of 5 or 6 people in every state. So the idea is not to replace the government system. The idea is to help them and enable them. So our teams will sort of conceptualize what has to be done, think through the implementation, but all of the implementation is still done through the government machinery and government mechanism. And that's an interesting exercise. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you like.
Yes, please, because let's face it, working with the government is not it's not going to be a cakewalk. And how do you, so especially when you come up with the concept, how do you ensure that it actually gets implemented in the way that you would intend, that your intention is to?
Yeah, I think for that, firstly, it's just helpful to even understand what is the size and scale of government system. I'll give you an example, or give you the range of examples. So we worked with Haryana many years ago, 6-7 years ago. Haryana has about 15,000 government schools, right? And it has roughly 2 million children and about 100,000 teachers, 1 lakh teachers. Currently, we're working in Madhya Pradesh, and Madhya Pradesh has 1 lakh government schools, nearly 3 lakh teachers, right? And then there are
Wow.
states in between. So exactly. And the states in between. Jharkhand has 35,000 schools, Odisha has 50,000 schools. So imagine that you're trying to bring about a change in 30,000 schools, 50,000 schools, 1 lakh schools, which are distributed in a very vast geographic area. Connectivity is poor. Most of the teachers don't actually have email. Most of them do have phones. Some have smartphones, some don't have smartphones. And eventually what you're trying to do is change the teaching learning process in some way inside the classroom, right? Or make a change at that school level. So it's not easy. It is absolutely not easy. I think the change processes also kind of go through these layers, so that it's easy to conceptualize the change. You can sit in Bhopal and conceptualize the change for Madhya Pradesh. Then it goes to the district officers, then it goes to the block officers, and then it kind of goes to the teachers. So there's at least 3 levels of communication and dilution of communication, which actually happen. So what we find is that it's easy to conceptualize change, but one has to recognize that to make change happen on the ground is easily a 3 to 4 year journey, right? And one has to really stick with it for that long, for every classroom, every teacher, and every student to actually, see and feel that change. When I'm traveling for work, and I go quite often, or I used to go quite often before COVID, what I would do is I would wake up in the mornings. I'd wake up at 6, and I would like just take a car and I'd start visiting schools in the morning before like the offices open, because schools open at 8. And what you find typically is that, let's say, even 18 months or 24 months into a program, if you went to 3 schools, one of them would be, undertaking the change exactly as you conceptualized it. They would be doing it, they would have adopted it, done it beautifully. A second one would be kind of doing it, but it would be kind of like a check the box. We're doing it, we don't really understand why we're doing it, but we're doing it. And a third one would not even be doing it, right? So the point I'm trying to make is that one requires an extreme amount of patience, to actually see change happen on the ground. Um, and one has to think that education reforms or system reforms of any type, where you're trying to make grassroots change, are like 5, 7, 10-year journeys. It's not one of those things which can kind of happen overnight, or you conceptualize it 1 year and within the academic year, it will actually change. So yeah, it's an exercise in, frustration as well as satisfaction. So when you go to that one school where things are happening, you feel joyful. And when you go to the third school where nothing is happening, you're like, what is this? But it's an interesting exercise.
It's very actually heartening to know that government is spending so much time and effort into ensuring that the transformation happens. We don't even get to hear about them because most of the time, I guess the media is not interested in actually focusing on what is actually happening in the country. And
Yeah.
also talking about the number of schools, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm a very frequent visitor to Uttarakhand and Chhattisgarh both. And what I've seen is every little village will have at least one school, if not two. If it's a slightly larger village, there'll be 2 schools, and every morning the kids are happily going to school. But I've actually sat down with them and opened up their textbooks, and I've tried to see how much of learning is happening. And I'm sorry to say, but the learning isn't happening because even it was difficult for them to even read like a second grade text English or whatever they had as a curriculum. So I couldn't understand where the disconnect is when there are schools and the kids are going to schools, but the learning is not happening. So there is definitely something not connecting.
Yeah. No, Sonal, so firstly, very impressive that you noticed that there are not just one, but maybe 2 or 3 schools in every village. And this is one of my, you can say, pet peeves or one of my big agendas. So I'll ask you a trivia question. Well, we spoke about this in our pre-chat, but for the audience, India has 1 million government schools, right? 1 million, 10 lakh government schools. And just if you compare that with China, you would assume that China, being a bigger country, might have, 2 million government schools. Typically, when I ask people how many schools do you think China has, most people will say 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. The truth is China has 1/4 our number of schools. So they only have 250,000, right? So 2.5 lakh. What happened, back in the 80s in India is a policy decision, I think, which was taken with the right intent, but potentially didn't necessarily go the right way. In the 1980s, we recognized that we still had very low participation rates in schools. And the way the government decided to address that was to say, we are going to now take schools to children. So India decided to build a school within 1 kilometer of every living in habitation. So the idea was that a child should have a school which is not more than 1 kilometer away, right? And which is why we have 1 million schools in the country. But at the same time, because resources are deficient, so it was also decided that a school which has less than 60 children will only get 2 teachers. So it will get 2 teachers, but it will not get a principal, it will not get any administrative staff, it will not get a sweeper. These 2 teachers have to do everything. So now imagine these schools, and there's about 500,000 of them, 5 lakh schools in the country, where there are less than 60 or 70 kids. All of them are in rural areas. Each one of them operates with 2 teachers, but there are 5 classes. So imagine one teacher is sitting with class 1, 2, and 3 every day, and the other teacher is sitting with class 4 and 5, and she's trying to teach the kids, all 3 grades at the same time. And the poor teacher is even confused ki, मैं किसको पढ़ाऊं? Who do I teach, right? Do I teach the 2nd grade child? Do I teach the 3rd grade child? And the same teacher then at 11 o'clock has to go and arrange the midday meal. And then in the school day itself, everything else which the government provides to students. So, for example, if it is, cycles to girls' children or scholarships, the same teacher, she is responsible for going to the bank, getting the kids' bank accounts opened, getting their money transferred. So what happens is that in these schools, almost there is no teaching at all. This is a concept which is called multi-graded, multi-level classrooms. And this is rampant in India. And until we address that, almost nothing can drastically improve the quality of education. I mean, forget those teachers. I think even if we imagined you or me and we're fairly educated, trying to teach 30 kids, 10 of them in class 1, 10 of them in class 2, and 10 of them in class 3 together at the same time. We can't. We can't. And you also have to recognize that these are, low income kids. They are typically first generation learners. So they have no academic support at home, right? Whatever they learn is is inside the classroom with the help of this teacher. So I think there are some fundamental structural gaps in the way education system has been designed and conceptualized in India. And until that changes, education can improve incrementally, but it can't really just transform. So I'm a big advocate of of saying that India needs to shut down half of its schools, 5 lakh schools to improve quality of education. I get a lot of brickbats for that also, because, the idea of shutting down schools seems like it just seems wrong. But we've done it. We've also done it in some states. We've supported Rajasthan to do it. We've supported Jharkhand in doing it. And the outcomes are largely positive.
Oh, okay. I was just going to ask, so what has the outcome been and how did that play out politically? I'm just wondering. Because shutting down schools and, I mean, people may not know why the schools are being shut because they may not understand the concept or, the deeper aspect of why the schools are shutting down. Yeah. So how does that score with the vote banks in the states?
Yeah, no, it's a very sensitive topic. I remember when we were doing this in Jharkhand, and we were supporting the government in doing it in Jharkhand. There were newspapers which were running reports about, governments shutting down schools. Every day there was a lot of backlash. There were rallies and protests. Political leaders got involved quite extensively. And it was very difficult. And kudos to the department leadership and government who kind of stuck it out. And today, we got IIM Ranchi to do a report on school mergers. And the reports are absolutely positive in terms of, dropouts not having happened, in terms of students feeling that they are now in a bigger school, which has a more vibrant environment. They have more friends. They're getting more attention from the teachers. Teachers are focusing on teaching them from their textbook and are not sort of confused about, which class to teach. Also, bigger schools basically means things like bigger playgrounds, more resources. So it has largely been positive, but it is still very difficult. I mean, there are many leaders who've tried to do it, but typically there's always a lot of backlash from either opposition, from community, um, and it's very hard thing to do. I do think that if it has to be done throughout the country, it has to be something which we think of as national policy rather than something that every state kind of tries to do on its own.
Yeah, I think this is lacking in India anyway. I think the intention doesn't come out to the general masses. I don't know where that disconnect happens, but I feel whenever I've spoken to guests on my platform, I realize that a lot of work is actually being put, but somehow we don't know about it, and
Yeah,
somehow the probably the lack of communication is happening because we don't understand what the intention is, and if
yeah,
people understand, I think the acceptance will be more. So
yeah.
somewhere the between the government and the general masses is completely missing. But because I mean, I can completely see where you're coming from. You make a very valid point that we need to shut down schools in order to improve the quality of education.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I think on intention, but to be fair to the masses, if they don't see the results, how does good intention help, right? So I agree that there's a lot of great intention. I would say of the 30 odd states in the country today, at least 20 to 25 are trying to do something in education. Reaching out to partners, reaching out to NGOs, trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. Uh, but there are many dilutions in what is conceptualized and what is done. There are many slips between the cup and the lip, and the change on the ground is little and is slow. So I don't necessarily fault the masses for not knowing or not understanding or not expecting more. You can look at it from both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once the community, if they understand it, the acceptance will be more. But the problem is the understanding, the communication. I think the problem, the lack is communication from, because there are so many layers. There's so much bureaucracy that's happening between the government and the masses. That somewhere I think the message gets lost,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we don't get to hear about them. Anyway, I think that's a whole different area of conversation.
yeah.
And talking about the implementation, Seema, what are the challenges that you face? Because it's never easy to work with, as you mentioned, it goes to three different levels of communication. There are so many different levels. So from the concept to the implementation, how do you make it work, and what are the challenges that you face?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that we face, I think, are threefold. One is, just leadership changes. Um, Typically, all of these departments are led by civil services officers, and we all know that civil services officers get transferred fairly frequently. The typical time span is 12 to 18 months. I've had sort of states that we've worked in where over a period of 2 years, we've had 4 different people leave the department. So it's imagine like it's trying to transform a company, but the CEO changes every 6 months. So how is that going to happen? And over a 5-year period, if we typically see, or a 3 to 5 year period, if we've been working in a state, typically the entire leadership will change, not just the senior most officer, but the mid-level officers also. And we often joke that the only people who are constant in that transformation journey are, me and my teams, and some of the mid-level and junior staff. So we become, in many ways, we become custodians of the project, but that's not helpful, right? With new leaders comes new thinking, new vision, a desire to start things afresh. So I think that is one big challenge. And I think having consistent leadership which stays for a long time, would be super helpful. The second thing is really just, I think the pace of things, just the way our, and we all know this, just the way our bureaucracy is structured, things take time. Things need approvals, they have to move up and down, sort of departments move, get signed, etc. So what you believe can happen in the corporate world, maybe in, 2 weeks, sometimes can
Right.
take months, right? Just, and not because of lack of intent, but that's just how process is set. Into that, something else will happen. So for example, an election will come up, and no files move when elections are happening. So there are states that I worked in, where within a year we had a state election and then a general election, like back in 2019. And for a year, like, nothing was just happening, right? You wouldn't have. So I think just the pace of decision making and the way decision making happens is just slower. It has its reasons, but it's just slower. I think that's the second thing. And third is just this distributed setup, which I talked about, and lack of sort of ways of engaging people at the grassroots level, from the center, and it having to go through so many layers and levels, which is a challenge. So from conceptualization to taking it to the grassroots, it just, there is a lot of dilution, there's a lot of sort of slips, and that's the third big challenge. I think the last one I'm very excited about, because I think COVID has, in many ways, while it has been devastating for schools and students, especially in rural areas, has really shown a different way of working, to states and to, school education departments and other departments. Today, we are able to engage with like tens of thousands of teachers on digital platforms. It was unimaginable, and directly. It was just no one even thought about it earlier. Earlier, the thinking was that, if you have to engage teachers or if you have to engage field staff, like if you're in Odisha, then everyone has to come to Bhubaneswar, for a 2-day workshop, and that is the only way to communicate. So people could only come once in 3 months, some people would come, some people wouldn't come. But now, like, every functionary in the system has Zoom and Teams and Meets, everything on their phone. They know exactly how to use it. I have seen school districts do parent-teacher meetings on Zoom in rural areas. I'm not joking, right? Like massive, thousands of people doing parent-teacher meetings on Zoom. Like there was one parent-teacher meeting I attended where a student actually, played like a welcome song for the district collector on Zoom during a parent-teacher meeting. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
so
That's
I
very
think there's some really exciting stuff which is happening in the last year in terms of breaking down communication barriers, setting up new ways of working, setting up communication channels. So I think that whole thing that we used to face around dilution of messages, and messages taking a long time to carry, is I think going to change. The other two, about leadership changes and pace of decision making, I think is just going to continue to remain a challenge until something big is done about it.
Yeah. So actually, that's very surprising. My next thought was on the pandemic because I mean, although pandemic has created unprecedented levels of challenges all across, but in the urban areas, the schools have really innovated themselves to ensure that the students actually get proper education in the way that they possibly could. And like you said, they come up with many new ideas of learning. In a lot of ways, actually, it has worked because now you don't need to be at one place for even for your learning come. So has that actually trickled down to the rural areas as well in terms of the learning?
Um,
You
you
know,
know, Yeah, very mixed. I think efforts were made, but I think when we look at sort of, the funnel of sort of digital penetration in India, so how many, bottom of the pyramid people actually have smartphones?
yeah,
How many have a smartphone, also have a data connectivity? How
yes,
many are then willing to use that data pack for their child to learn, because that data pack is limited? You're willing to spend, let's say, 199 rupees a month, right? What are you willing to use that for? And then how many children actually have the desire and the ability to open up like a video on their phone, or something that is being sent by the school system? It is really, that funnel goes from like this to like, it's maybe 10% kids, across the country in rural areas got uh, any sort of digital education that they consumed. Only 10%, right? So 1 out of 10. And it has genuinely been super devastating, super devastating. And if we go through one more year of, kids not going to schools and schools not opening, it is going to have a generational impact on these kids for sure. But I think on the positive side, what has happened is that the eyes of the teacher community and parent community to the possibilities of how amazing digital content can be as a supplement to learning have opened up. So the teachers typically do have smartphones, typically have seen the content. So I think the teachers are super excited potentially about leveraging digital content when they go back into schools. So for example, if I am teaching the solar system, can I not just draw it on the board, but can I even pass around my phone with the solar system video to all the students, so that they can actually see it, right? So I think that is sort of how can digital content enhance the ability of a teacher to teach inside the classroom. I think that has probably sort of seen a big change. So very excited about that. I think over the last year, many NGOs, social enterprises really stepped up on creating digital content in, not just English, but in Hindi, in Odia, in Marathi, in Gujarati, in all of the rural languages. There was very little digital content, for poorer students, for students who were studying in vernacular languages. So we have much larger content libraries today. So I think some of those things. So I do think that once schools open, the way classroom transactions happen may look a little bit different. We may have a lot more access to digital content. It will support the teachers in, teaching better, hopefully. And I think those are the plus sides. But I cannot, sort of in any way say that EdTech was successful during COVID for rural students. It touched maybe 10% students, honestly.
Yeah, we were not even prepared for it actually, right? When it hit us, we were not even prepared, and because to create that infrastructure is it's a project on its own if you really think about it. But now I think going forward, schools might be better prepared to handle a pandemic situation, I guess. At least teachers are excited, so maybe new ways of learning will come for them, because it's very sad that a whole year has gone by, and like you said, only 10% of the students actually got any learning. So it's the other. Go ahead, Seema.
No, go ahead.
Actually, I was also thinking that once the conceptual to implement from a concept level to implementation, how do you even sustain it? So once the implementation happens, right? How do you ensure that it's sustainable? That innovation is there for the students, and also that it actually translates into something meaningful for them in terms of job. How do you ensure that? Or is that once the implementation is done, then then BCG is out of the picture? How does that whole process is set up?
Yeah,
I know it's a
No, I don't know. Look, that's a fair question, and I think you give BCG, and my teams too much credit. If you believe that we do all of the implementation, we support it. But I think, this is something for one of the persons who I consider a mentor asked me a long time ago. He said, when you work in an education system, are you trying to improve the education quality of the system, or are you trying to improve the capability of the system to improve itself, right? So are you trying to improve the system, or are you trying to improve the capability of the system to improve itself? And those are two different things. Improving the system would mean like trying to change things inside the classrooms, changing the textbooks, training the teachers, putting in better accountability systems, whatever it is. Improving the capability of the system would actually mean, can we work with the people who make policy and who implement things, and improve their ability to think through what change is needed to help them better implement changes and develop that capability. And I do think that the effort always is to try and do both. You want to show some short-term results, and you want to make sure that the system feels some positivity about where it's moving, how it's how things are changing. But you also want to leave behind systems and structures which can carry forward the change and build on it, right? So the latter would, for example, mean things like, there are academic bodies in a state, it's called SCRT. So like we have NCRT, every state has an SCRT, which decides what the academic curriculum is, which trains the teachers, etc. So how can we strengthen SCRT in a state? How can we strengthen their capability? How can we bring more coaching and training to them? And not just through us, because we're not even necessarily experts in everything, but through other partners who come in and train folks, right? So I think there's an equal amount of effort in putting in those systems such that the change can be carried forward. Those are the harder things to do, honestly, right? Helping recruit people, helping set up new organizations, helping strengthen organizations, etc. Those are the harder things to do. But we try and make sure that some of that happens. The other thing is that typically these change processes, when let's say one organization exits, typically another one will enter. So our work, for example, might be taken over by another NGO, or a multilateral, bilateral, like a World Bank or ADB might be stepping in. The progressive states who care to do something always will have a group of partners, who are working with them. It could be us, it could be someone else. And as long as there is an adequate handover, the program kind of continues to find handholding. I don't want to say that the handover is always smooth. All organizations come in with their own beliefs and ideas. We believe in a certain set of things, someone else may believe in another set of things. But I'm hoping that we don't create too much chaos for the state with our own beliefs, but are able to continue the change process. But overall, it's an interesting journey. I mean, I've been doing this for 7-8 years. I can't sort of look back and say, hey, we worked in one place and we completely transformed it. All we can say is that, we worked in many places, and we've helped make things better a little bit. Some places a little bit, more. But we've learned a lot, and I'm hoping that every new place that we work in, we are able to do more than the previous one. Yeah. And I would love to see a state in India, which sort of says, hey, our schools are better than private schools in this state. I would love to see one state get to that where government schools are better than private schools, or at least as good.
Yeah, aiming to that actually. I have quite a few comments here. I'm just going to quickly go over them. Trump said, education is important, but also internet access is important in rural India. I found a rural India student, gave him website work from the US. He's now director of IT for Motorola in India. Wow. So he is saying internet access, all studies are on the internet. You can go to Harvard via internet, get internet to rural areas, and the education is automatically delivered. The change that is needed is to think differently. Conventional, I'm just going to highlight that also. The conventional education is a thing of the past. Internet education is the foundation of the future. To do things in the same conventional manner is setting your country up for challenges in the future. Yes, so now I think we are better prepared to ensure that we actually bring technology to the rural areas as well. I think before this pandemic, I don't think we were, I mean, he's absolutely right. I don't think we were even thinking in those directions as to go completely online. But like Seema is saying, that now the teachers have a better way of teaching. And I'm pretty sure with the coming days, we will be more geared up to actually providing some sort of online education to the rural segment. Seema, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think while I would agree with that comment, I think we need to disaggregate a little bit, right? So I think when you think about very young kids, education starts at the age of 3, and when you think about, foundational literacy and numeracy, when you think about what we have seen is that kids almost all the way up to grade 5 find it very difficult to learn purely on technology platforms, without any assistance. And we have to recognize that there is very limited assistance from parents. So while I agree that technology has to be a core part of the learning process, I don't think it is self-sufficient, especially for younger grades, right? And as you move into higher grades and children are more self-sufficient, I do think that they can learn a lot more on their own, and need less and less support. So I think, this worldview that technology can replace schools or technology can replace teachers, I don't fully agree with that. I think it's a great complement, and it has to be leveraged by the teachers, but that's how one has to think about it.
I completely agree. Also, I think there is value to human interaction, because in my opinion, education is not just about what's available on the textbook. Because from elementary to middle to high school, there's a lot of interaction that you are having with your peers, with your teachers, which actually also prepare you for life. So education, in my mind, is also about the experiences that actually it brings to you while you are learning. It's not just about the textbook learning. So, and there is a different quality to, having that human interaction, having that, there's a quality in that too. So I completely agree with you, Seema, that this could be an additional segment which can actually support the learning, but it could not be it cannot replace schools. I don't think it should replace schools.
Yeah.
So thank you for all those comments. Though let me just see. Are there any more to do things the same conventional way? Yes, a lot of us. So thank you, Seema. That brings me. I think I have. You have pretty much addressed all all the questions that I had in mind, and I'm pretty sure that you. Okay, I have one more comment. I'm just going to quickly go over that. Education starts in the womb. All right. We read to our children while still in the womb. At 3, today's kids have iPads and Sesame Street to learn. Nothing will replace the school of hard knocks. Of absolutely. I'm glad we are all on the same page as far as the schools are concerned. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up the show. Thank you, Seema, for being here, for addressing all of those issues. It was absolutely brilliant, as expected. So, again, before I wrap up, stay safe, stay healthy, stay home unless and until it's absolutely important. Thank you again, Seema. This is Just Sonal signing off. See you again. Bye.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.